Picture yourself at a restaurant on a random Tuesday night. The dessert menus are laminated. The booth vinyl sticks to your arm. There's a couple to your left and a couple to your right, and both couples just ordered the same $22 salmon. The couple on your left retired with $1.1 million. The couple on your right retired with $4.9 million. And it's the couple on your right who grabs the check, turns it toward the window, and reads it twice. That's not a joke about being cheap. That's literally what the retirement data shows. And it wrecks everything you've been taught about your number, because you've been assuming these numbers work like floors: 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, each one unlocking a bigger version of the life you already have. More trips. A nicer car. Same person, just upgraded. That is not what actually happens. My name is Yank, and if you've ever divided your account balance by 25 and just stared blankly at the result, hit subscribe, because today you're going to find out exactly what changes at each of these numbers. And it's never about the salmon. Let's start with the woman on your left, because you'll be doing math alongside her for the next 20 minutes. Meet Denise, 66 years old, $1 million saved, a paid-off house, and a 14-year-old Camry that 3 different people have told her to replace. She keeps it anyway, because it still runs, which apparently counts as insane behavior for a millionaire, and is also exactly what you would do in her position. She's the number most people picture when they think retired, and her portfolio isn't even her most valuable asset. Then there's Marcus, sitting on $2 million, who keeps a spreadsheet with one tab he refuses to open. And then there's Sylvia, at $5.62 million, with an estate attorney's business card stuck to her refrigerator. Hold on to that detail about the card, it matters more than you'd think, and it's arguably the most expensive object she owns. Here's the framework you need to carry through this whole video, because it reorganizes everything. Your number doesn't just buy you a lifestyle. It moves you into an entirely different system. At $1 million, you're a Social Security recipient with a nice supplement on top. Cross into $2 million, and you stop being a retiree and start being a tax problem, and I mean that with total affection. Cross into $5 million, and you become a legal structure, complete with documents, trustees, and a state government that has strong opinions about how you die. Different systems. Different opponents. Different rulebooks. And the gap between them isn't a straight line. 3 things I'm going to make you wait for. There's a specific number where Social Security finally stops matching, and it isn't where you'd guess. There's a real reason that couple on your right read the check twice. And there's a hidden price tag on each of these jumps that nobody ever quotes you, and I'll tell you which one should actually cost you sleep. But first, you deserve a reality check about where you actually stand right now. The median Fidelity 401k balance in this country is $34,400. Not the average, which sits at $146,000 and includes a lot of people living a very different financial life than you, the median, the real middle of the pack. So if you're sitting there thinking you're nowhere close to $1 million, good, that makes you completely normal. It also means this video is exactly for you, because your job right now isn't to already have the money. It's to figure out which of these numbers is actually worth walking toward before you spend 20 years walking blind. Nobody tells you that part. They just hand you a number and wish you luck. And these numbers are far apart from each other. Your first million puts you in the top 12 to 18% of American households. Your second million puts you in the top 7 to 10%. Your fifth million puts you in the top 2%. Past that point, it stops being a curve and starts being a wall. For context, the Federal Reserve puts the median American household net worth at $193,000. The mean, by comparison, is $1.06 million. So every single time someone quotes you, the average retiree's net worth, you're being handed the wrong number, usually on purpose. Back to Denise. At a 4% withdrawal rate, she pulls $40,000 a year from her portfolio. She and her husband also collect Social Security, and the average married couple's combined benefit runs about $3,200 a month, call it $38,000 a year. Look closely at that ratio, because it's the single most important thing in this whole video. Her portfolio generates $40,000. Social Security generates $38,000. That government program does something her portfolio never will, it doesn't run out, and it gives itself a raise every January whether the market cooperates or not. So what's that actually worth in dollar terms? An inflation-adjusted annuity that replicates a $2,000 a month benefit costs somewhere near $380,000 to buy on the open market. If both you and your spouse worked, your combined Social Security benefit alone can be worth over $1 million. Read that twice. Denise thinks she has $1 million. She actually has closer to 2. And the invisible half of that total is the half that can never crash, which is exactly why she feels poorer than she actually is. Your biggest asset never sends you a monthly statement. It doesn't show up in any app. There's no balance to obsessively check at 11 at night, so your brain simply refuses to count it as real. You've watched that line disappear from your paycheck for 30 straight years and quietly filed it away as theft. Congratulations, you actually own your single best asset, and you resent it every single payday. Now for the good news, and there's a genuinely absurd amount of it at this income level, the tax code mostly leaves you alone. If you're married and your taxable income stays under roughly $98,900, your long-term capital gains rate isn't reduced, it's zero. You can sell stock, realize $60,000 in gains, and hand the IRS absolutely nothing. That's not some clever loophole you discovered. That's the plainly printed tax rate that almost nobody who actually qualifies for it ever uses. You also get the extra senior deduction, $6,000 per person over 65, which phases out above $150,000 in income. At Denise's level, you keep every dollar of it. At Marcus's level, you watch it slowly evaporate. At Sylvia's level, you never see it at all. Same tax code, same calendar year, 3 completely different countries depending on your account balance. Here's the part that should genuinely worry you: sequence of returns risk. If the market drops 30% in your first 3 years of retirement, your $40,000 withdrawal is no longer 4% of your portfolio, it's now 6% of what's left. And every share you're forced to sell at the bottom never gets to participate in the eventual recovery. Retire in the year 2000, and you get hit by both the dot-com crash and the financial crisis within 9 years, which is less a rough patch and more a cruel joke. Congratulations, you timed the market perfectly, in exactly the wrong direction. At Denise's level, that isn't dinner table small talk. That's your entire plan collapsing while you're still healthy enough to watch it happen in real time. Sylvia, with her $5 million, would call that same exact crash a bad year. Same market, same week, 2 completely different emotional experiences. Which brings us to a fight most people don't even know is happening over their own retirement money. You've heard about the 4% rule your entire adult life. Here's what nobody tells you: the man who originally created that rule has spent the last 30 years quietly walking it back. Bill Bengen ran the original study back in 1994, and his actual number was 4.15%, everyone else just rounded it down for you. He later raised it to 4.5%, then to 4.7%. Today he calls that figure your absolute worst-case floor, says 5 to 5.5% is perfectly fine under normal market conditions, and points out that the true historical average is closer to 7%. Meanwhile, Morningstar runs its own forward-looking analysis every single year, and their most recent number lands at 3.9%. So the 2 most frequently cited authorities on the single question your entire retirement depends on are a full percentage point apart. On $1 million, that's the difference between $39,000 a year and $47,000 a year, a 20% raise or pay cut decided entirely by whose spreadsheet you happen to trust. They're not disagreeing about the facts. They're disagreeing about methodology, and both sides have a defensible case, which is an extremely annoying thing to hear when you're trying to decide whether you can actually retire in March. And this is exactly where I remind you, I'm not a financial advisor, and nothing here is personalized advice. I'm just a guy who reads way too many footnotes and finds other people's academic arguments entertaining. Now let's go visit Marcus. At $2 million, the first thing that changes is exactly what you'd expect: you spend more. He pulls $80,000 a year at a 4% withdrawal rate, plus that same roughly $38,000 from Social Security. Congratulations, you doubled your net worth and bought yourself a slightly nicer grocery store. But watch what happened to the proportions while nobody was paying attention. At Denise's level, Social Security made up half of everything she lived on. At Marcus's level, it's down to about a third. Same exact program, same exact check amount, and its grip on his life loosened by a third without him lifting a single finger. Here's the part nobody warns you about: you just crossed the line where the tax code stops ignoring you and starts actively negotiating with you. That 0% capital gains bracket Denise was comfortably living inside. Marcus's income now sails right past that $98,900 threshold, so it's completely gone. His senior deduction phases out exactly as advertised. And then there's the one appointment on the calendar you genuinely cannot reschedule: required minimum distributions. At age 73, the government forces you to start withdrawing from your traditional retirement accounts whether you actually want the money or not. By 75, Marcus's $2 million IRA forces out roughly $81,300 in taxable ordinary income every year. You don't get a vote. You don't get to say, "I'm fine this year, thanks." The IRS waited 3 decades for its cut, and it would very much like to be paid now. And it compounds. It drags more of your Social Security benefit into taxable territory, because those income thresholds, $25,000 for single filers, $32,000 for married couples, were written back in the 1980s and have never once been adjusted for inflation. Apparently indexing them for inflation slipped everyone's mind for 4 straight decades. You could be standing right on top of that line and have absolutely no idea it's there. Then there's IRMAA, which might be the quietest, meanest mechanism in the entire American retirement system. It adjusts your Medicare premiums based on your income from 2 years earlier. Not a gradual slope, a hard cliff. $1 over your threshold triggers the entire next pricing bracket for the whole year. These surcharges range anywhere from about $1,100 to nearly $7,000 per person. $1 extra of income can cost you $1,000 in premiums. That's not really a tax, it's a toll booth that appears in your rearview mirror 24 months after you already drove past it. And you can't even argue about it, because technically it's your own fault for having a good financial year. So what genuinely gets better for Marcus here? Sequence of returns risk stops being fatal. If he's spending $80,000 from a $2 million portfolio and the market falls apart, he can cut back to $65,000 and simply ride it out. When Denise has to cut from $40,000 down to $25,000, that's an entirely different life. When Marcus cuts from $80,000 down to $65,000, that's just a different vacation. His long-term care math shifts too. A private nursing home room runs about $129,000 a year, and roughly 70% of people turning 65 will need some form of long-term care. 3 years of that care eats up 40% of everything Denise owns. It still hurts badly at Marcus's level. At Sylvia's level, it barely registers at all. Now, before we get to Sylvia, I owe you the actual reason that couple on the right read their check twice. The Employee Benefit Research Institute has tracked retirees for decades, and they found that a third of retirees, 20 years into retirement, still hold everything they started with, or even more. These aren't people who got lucky. These are people just like you, who did everything they were told to do and simply never figured out how to stop. Not, most of it left, more than all of it remained. They died wealthier than the day they stopped working, which is technically a win for the portfolio and a fairly grim outcome for the actual human being. If you retire with $500,000 or more, your median spend down over 20 years is only 11.8%. If you'd started with under $200,000, you'd typically spend down 25%. Sit with that inversion for a second, because it's really the whole point of this video. The people with the least money spend down the largest share of it. The people with the most money spend down the smallest share. The better you do financially, the tighter you end up holding on. Denise holds tighter than you'd expect. Marcus holds tighter than Denise. Sylvia holds tightest of all. And every single one of them would tell you, with complete confidence, that they're just being sensible. So would you. That's the trap. It never feels like fear. It feels like discipline. JP Morgan's research finds that 2/3 of households following the 4% rule finish out 30 years with the same amount of money or more than they started with. And researchers Blanchett and Finca found that a typical 65-year-old couple actually withdraws just 2.1% a year, not 4%, too. So this entire academic fight you just watched play out over your financial future. You'll probably never get anywhere close to it in real life. Two economists arguing over whether you can safely spend 4% while almost nobody in the audience is even spending 3%. It's like watching people debate the speed limit in an empty parking lot. You won't run out of money, you'll run out of permission to actually enjoy it. That's your couple on the right. That's their check, turned toward the window, read twice. And it might end up being yours in 30 years. Alright, now Sylvia, $5 million. Sit in her seat for this part, because you've been told what this feels like, and you've been told wrong. Most of what changes at this level isn't upside, it's obligation. She pulls $200,000 a year at a 4% withdrawal rate, and her Social Security is now down to just 16% of her total income. Which brings me to the number I made you wait for, and I need to correct something you've probably heard elsewhere. People commonly say Social Security stops mattering around $3 million. Run the actual math yourself, at $3 million. You're pulling $120,000 a year, and Social Security is still 24% of your income, a full quarter of everything you live on. The actual point where it drops below 15% of your total income is $5.4 million. Which means even at $5 million, you still haven't crossed that line. The program that made up half of Denise's entire life is still a sixth of Sylvia's. And that check is doing far more work in your retirement than you'll ever actually give it credit for. Now watch the machinery close in around her. At 75, Sylvia's $5 million IRA forces out roughly $203,000 in required distributions. She doesn't need it. She didn't ask for it. It shows up anyway, as ordinary income, guaranteeing top-bracket tax exposure. There's also a 3.8% net investment income surtax that kicks in starting at $250,000, and that threshold has also never been adjusted for inflation, apparently because nobody in Washington owns a calculator. Welcome to the point where inflation quietly does the legislating for Congress. And the Roth conversion strategy that works beautifully at Denise's income level, converting cheaply before required distributions kick in, actually backfires at Sylvia's level. Since she's already sitting in high tax brackets, and converting more just triggers additional income tax and additional surtax, the move that's a total no-brainer at your first million becomes counterproductive at your fifth, which is exactly why generic financial advice fails you harder the better you actually do. Good luck finding a video that mentions that part. Now go look at Sylvia's refrigerator, because that business card is about to become relevant to you too. It belongs to an estate attorney, and here's why it's there. The federal estate tax exemption currently sits at $15 million per person, or $30 million per married couple, and that's been made permanent. So technically, you owe zero federal estate tax, and every headline you've ever read tells you that you're completely fine. Except 12 states run their own separate estate taxes, and they never got that memo. Retire in Oregon, and your state exemption starts at just $1 million. In Massachusetts, it's $2 million. In Illinois, $4 million. And in New York, exceeding your exemption by even 5% exposes your entire estate to taxation, which functions less like tax policy and more like a bear trap with an official state seal on it. So you can be comfortably below the federal exemption line and still owe a six-figure state estate tax bill purely because of which side of a state border you happen to retire on. Your children are the ones who pay it. You won't be around to explain why. And Marcus, back at $2 million, is already sitting inside that exact trap in Oregon and Massachusetts. He just doesn't know it yet. His spreadsheet has a tab for exactly this. He never opens that tab. You probably have a tab just like it too. And you already know exactly what it's called. That's the moment you stop being a person with a portfolio and start being a person who needs a trust, an attorney, and an actual domicile strategy. Welcome to the point where your money needs its own paperwork just to be inherited correctly. One more thing, and this one's personal: fee drag. A 1% advisory fee on your first million costs you $10,000 a year. That exact same fee, for the exact same service, on your fifth million costs you $50,000 a year. 5 times the cost for the same 4 phone calls a year. Technically that's just a percentage. Functionally, it's a subscription to being wealthy, and it renews automatically whether you actually use it or not. Over 30 years, that 1% fee eats up 30% of your final portfolio value, and most of what you lost was compounding growth you never even got to watch happen. Flat fee advisors do exist. $4,000 flat on a $1 million portfolio works out to 0.4%. On a $5 million portfolio, that same flat fee works out to just 0.08%. At that level, a 1% fee is close to indefensible, and the people charging it to you would strongly prefer you never run that math in front of them. Which brings me to the price tag I promised you earlier, and it's the one that actually matters most. Nobody ever quotes you the cost of the jump between these numbers. They only ever quote you the destination, which is the oldest trick in the entire financial industry's playbook. So here it is, saving $30,000 a year at a 7% return. Getting from your first million to your second million takes about 8 years. Getting from your second million to your fifth takes 12 more years after that. That's 20 years total, start to finish, to move from Denise's life to Sylvia's life. 20 years. That's the real price, not measured in dollars, measured in years. And they're the good years. The ones where your knees still work and your friends still pick up the phone. Nobody quotes you that number, because nobody can send you an invoice for it. And you already know exactly how those years tend to get spent. A third of retirees die holding on to everything they started with. Blanchett's research finds that real spending actually declines 1 to 2% a year, bottoming out around 26% below where you started, typically around age 84. Everybody slows down eventually. Your fifth million does not buy your knees back. So your honest question isn't really whether $5 million beats $1 million, obviously it does. Your real question is whether those 20 years cost you less than what they actually bought you. Only you can answer that, because they're your 20 years, and nobody else is coming to spend them for you. Here's what those 20 years genuinely do buy you, and I want to be fair here, because it's real: optionality, which is a genuinely terrible word for something you'd happily pay 2 decades for. At your first million, 1 bad decade can end your entire plan. At your second, it's a smaller boat and a rough few years. At your fifth, it's one uncomfortable conversation that you then never think about again. You're not really buying a better life. You're buying immunity from the kinds of disasters that would otherwise completely rearrange the life you already have. That's genuinely worth something, just something very different from what your number implies it should be. And there's a real ceiling on what that money can buy you. That famous finding about happiness plateauing around $75,000 a year got revisited by the original researchers themselves, and their updated answer was messier than either side wanted to admit. Your happiness does keep climbing as your income rises. But the size of the increases keeps shrinking, and if you happen to fall into the least happy fifth of people, your happiness stops improving at all around the $100,000 mark, because whatever was actually making you unhappy was never really a budgeting problem to begin with. Your money keeps working on your behalf. It just works less and less per dollar, which might be the single most expensive sentence in this entire video. One last thing, and you should genuinely write this down somewhere. $1 million in the year 2000 had the same purchasing power that $1.87 million has today. Flip that around, and your $1 million right now buys what $535,000 used to buy back then. Your number never actually moved. The world moved underneath it instead. You didn't get poorer. Your $1 million did. So let's put you back at that restaurant table. Denise is on your left, holding the single best asset in the entire room and not even counting it. Marcus is across town with a tab on his spreadsheet he still refuses to open. Sylvia is on your right, reading her check twice, not because she can't afford it, but because nobody ever taught her how to stop climbing. And you're sitting right in the middle, which happens to be the only seat in the restaurant that still has real options left. Because that third of retirees who die with everything they started didn't fail at math. They succeeded completely at accumulating, and simply never learned the second half of the skill. Nobody ever teaches you how to stop. The entire financial industry is built to help you climb, then goes completely silent the moment you actually arrive at the top. So the real question I want to leave you with isn't, what's my number? It's this: if you woke up at your number tomorrow morning, what would you actually do differently on Wednesday? If your honest answer is, nothing, figure that out now, while you still have those 20 years available to spend on something else entirely. And if your answer is something specific, something you can actually picture clearly, then you already know exactly what you're climbing toward. And the number itself is just logistics. Everything in this video is observation and arithmetic, not personal financial advice, and every single figure has a date attached to it, so verify anything you're actually planning to act on. Now go find your Wednesday.